In the heart of a small Indian city, when the world was still chained by colonial power, a child was born. He was brilliant from the very beginning, disciplined, spiritual, and fiercely independent. Where other children saw lessons, he saw patterns of thought. Where others memorized, he questioned. His father, a respected lawyer, wanted him to serve the empire to build prestige under British rule. But his mother whispered something different into his soul. Your country is not free. Never forget that. By the time he reached his 20s, the boy from Cuttack had become one of India's most promising students. He topped his university exams in philosophy, earning admiration even from his British professors. But his mind was restless. He wanted to see the world not as a slave but as an equal. So, in 1919, with his father's insistence, he sailed for England. The destination, the prestigious University of Cambridge. The goal, to appear for the civil service examination, the golden ticket to serving the British crown. In London, he lived among the elite, young men in fine suits, future administrators of the empire. He studied hard, waking before dawn, reading philosophy late into the night. Even after studying for 1 year less, when the results came, he ranked 4th. The British Empire had just gained another star recruit. Or so they thought. One afternoon, while walking through Hyde Park, he passed a British newspaper stand. The headline screamed, "Rebellion in Punjab. Hundreds killed at Amritsar." Because of suspecting people rebellion at a fair due to Antip, they decided to open fire 1,650 rounds of ammunition for 10 to 15 minutes, ceasing only when they ran out of bullets. The fair turned into bloodbath. 1,000 deaths suspected and 1,500 people injured. He froze. That day, 13 April 1919, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre changed everything. He could not reconcile his conscience with the idea of serving the same empire that butchered innocents in cold blood. He began to question his purpose. Is success, he wrote in his diary, worth my soul if it comes at the cost of my nation's dignity? In 1921, a letter arrived at the India office in London. Polite, brief, final. I wish to resign from the Indian civil service. I cannot serve a foreign government that rules my people by oppression. The bureaucrats were stunned. No Indian had ever voluntarily walked away from the empire's highest honor. When asked for an explanation, he simply said, "My loyalty belongs to my country." He returned home not as a government servant, but as a man with a mission. The journey back was quiet, but within him, a storm was brewing. He looked out at the endless ocean, whispering to himself, "I will go back not to serve, but to fight." When his ship docked in Bombay, the air was thick with uncertainty. India was changing. Gandhi's movement for non-cooperation had awakened the masses. Every corner of the land echoed with a single demand, freedom. Every street corner echoed with the cry, Inquilab Zindabad. Freedom had become more than a dream. It had become a promise. He sought out the leaders of the national movement, joined the Indian National Congress, and soon found himself working closely with one of Bengal's most influential men, a fiery nationalist who recognized his brilliance instantly. "We must not wait for change," he declared. "We must become the change." He spoke of economic freedom, military strength, and national pride. He called upon students, soldiers, and workers to prepare, not for petitions but for revolution. Reports began to circulate in colonial offices. Young Indian radical organizing protests in Calcutta. Influence spreading rapidly among students. Potential threat to public order. The man who had once been invited to serve the crown was now marked as a danger to it. He was arrested multiple times. Solitary confinement, brutal interrogations, constant surveillance. But every time he emerged, his resolve hardened. He refused to bend. He refused to apologize. Inside prison walls, he wrote letters, not of despair, but of determination. He studied political philosophy, revolutionary strategy, and military history. He knew the next stage of India's struggle could not rely only on words. It needed organization, vision, command. He had turned away from comfort, wealth, and recognition, all for one burning dream, freedom. a word he would one day redefine for an entire nation. But his journey was only beginning. The real storm, the one that would shake the empire to its core, was still gathering on the horizon. He worked tirelessly beside the great leaders of the age, Gandhi, Nehru, and others who shaped India's destiny. But even among them, he stood apart. While Gandhi spoke of nonviolence and moral resistance, this young revolutionary believed in preparation, in discipline, in training, in readiness for any challenge. He once wrote, "When a nation is enslaved for centuries, prayer alone is not enough. The soul must act, not merely hope." His words resonated deeply with the youth. He became a symbol of action, a voice for those who wanted freedom not tomorrow, but now. In Congress sessions, his speeches lit up the halls. Talks and compromises cannot make slaves free. Freedom demands sacrifice, not sympathy. The older leaders were impressed, but also uneasy. They saw in him a fire that could either light the nation or burn it down. Gandhi preached patience. We must win freedom through moral strength. But our man believed time was running out. He saw another war coming, a global storm, and he believed that if India did not seize the moment, it might remain in chains for another century. He openly argued that the Congress should build its own defense force, a disciplined organization capable of resisting British power if necessary. The older generation was horrified. They feared this would destroy the moral foundation of their movement. Gandhi, ever the apostle of peace, said gently, "Freedom that comes through violence will carry the seeds of its own destruction." But the younger leader stood firm. Slavery is itself violence, and every moment of delay is another wound to our nation's soul. In 1938, the Indian National Congress gathered to elect its next president. For years, this had been a symbolic role, but now it would decide the future direction of the freedom movement. The elders favored a moderate, someone who would maintain Gandhi's philosophy. But the youth of India rallied behind one name, our mysterious leader. The result shocked everyone. He won decisively. Even Gandhi, though disappointed, accepted the decision, saying, "My defeat is not the defeat of truth." But for him something felt hollow one evening. After a long and heated session, he walked out of the Congress headquarters alone. Rain poured down the streets of Calcutta. He paused for a moment under a street lamp, drenched but resolute. The sound of the storm seemed to echo the turmoil within him. "If the path of truth demands solitude," he whispered, "then solitude it shall be." A few weeks later, he resigned from the presidency. The man who had once led the Congress now walked away from it, not in defeat but in defiance. Because Gandhiji wanted freedom by peace and nonviolent resistance, but he believed freedom is not given, it is taken. The year was 1940. Across the world, dark clouds gathered. Europe was on fire. Nations fell one after another beneath the march of war. And far away, in a quiet house in Calcutta, one man sat under strict British watch. A man once celebrated as a national leader, now branded a dangerous radical. He had resigned from the Congress, defied the British Raj, and preached resistance in its most daring form. For the empire, he had become a problem too unpredictable to contain and too influential to ignore. So they locked him down. Round-the-clock surveillance. No visitors' letters censored. Phones tapped. He saw what others didn't. The world was about to break into pieces. Germany, Italy, Japan. The old order collapsing. And when empires fight, the oppressed can rise. One evening in January 1941, the house was quiet. A heavy police guard waited outside, unaware that history was about to slip through their fingers. He changed into a long brown coat, round spectacles, and a Muslim cleric's cap. His face was partially covered. In his pocket, forged papers under the name Muhammad Jiauddin. At exactly 1:30 a.m., a car rolled up to the back door. Its headlights dimmed. Inside was his nephew, ready to drive. The guards outside, used to his silence, didn't notice a thing. The door opened quietly, a shadow slipped into the car, and just like that, the most wanted man in India disappeared into the night. They reached Peshawar, the edge of British India. Beyond it lay the tribal frontier and Afghanistan, a dangerous zone ruled by smugglers and spies. For weeks, he moved through barren lands, dusty towns, and treacherous passes. At one point, British agents came within a few miles of catching him, but he changed routes at the last minute. The only route open was through Soviet territory. With false documents, he crossed the freezing mountains into Russia, traveling by train under German diplomatic protection. Imagine it. A man hunted by the British, moving quietly across enemy borders, negotiating with powers who themselves dreamed of empire. Soon, he made his way to Berlin, and there, in the heart of Nazi Germany, he began a new chapter. In early 1942, he was granted an audience with Adolf Hitler, the man whose armies had swept across Europe. It was a dangerous meeting. The German leader saw himself as the master of destiny. Our Indian revolutionary saw himself as the liberator of his people. They met in a grand chamber of the Reich Chancellery. Marble floors, flags, and the sharp scent of power. Hitler spoke first, through interpreters, asking, "What can Germany offer India?" Our leader replied, his voice calm but firm, "Freedom. That is all my country seeks. Help us achieve it, and India will stand beside any power that recognizes her right to be free." Hitler listened, intrigued but cautious. He admired the man's courage, his daring escape, his eloquence, his resolve. But he was preoccupied with his own war in Europe. Still, the meeting was not in vain. From it, our leader gained something crucial: official recognition from Germany as the head of India's provisional government in exile, and access to resources to organize Indian soldiers captured from the British Army. Across Europe, thousands of Indian soldiers, captured while fighting under the British flag, were now prisoners of war. Our mysterious leader visited them, one camp after another. He walked among them not as a foreign diplomat, but as one of their own. He spoke to them in their native tongues, Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi. He said, "You fought under the wrong flag, but now fight for your motherland." Thus began the formation of the Free India Legion, a unit under German command but loyal only to India. But as the war dragged on, the European front grew bleak. Germany's expansion slowed. Meanwhile, in the east, a new power was rising: Japan. In just months, Japan had swept across Southeast Asia, capturing Singapore, Malaya, Burma. And with those victories came tens of thousands of Indian soldiers, prisoners of war who had fought for the British. The Japanese saw an opportunity, and so did our revolutionary. In early 1943, arrangements were made. A German submarine, U-180, left the port of Kiel, carrying 2 secret passengers. One of them was our revolutionary. For 3 long months, he traveled underwater across the Atlantic, evading Allied ships, deep in the belly of steel and silence. It was one of the most daring voyages ever undertaken by a political leader. When the submarine reached the Indian Ocean, he was transferred mid-sea to a Japanese vessel, a transfer that defied logic and borders alike. From there, he sailed eastward, toward a land bathed in the rising sun. He met Prime Minister Tojo and laid out his plan. "With your support, I will raise an Indian army, an army that will march to Delhi and end British rule." Japan agreed. They saw him not as a subordinate, but as a symbol of Asian solidarity against Western domination. And thus began the most audacious military project in India's history, the Indian National Army. The 40,000 captured soldiers from India who fought for Britain were captured by Japan. They came from every corner of India, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim. But they did not want it to fight again. They had lost all hopes. They did not want it to fight with their brothers and sisters in Britain's army. The army included 4 men's regiment Shah Nawaz Khan, Prem Sagal, and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon Regiment, and a women's regiment named the Jhansi Ki Rani Regiment, led by Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan, which served as a symbol of women's empowerment. He decided to motivate them by giving a speech. Our leader addressed them under a blazing tropical sun. His words echoed through the ranks. "Give me blood, and I will give you freedom." I have also translated some other lines. You can read them if you want, or skip 10 seconds. From the ashes of defeat and exile, he had built an army from nothing, men and women bound not by fear, but by faith. Faith that India's destiny was not to kneel, but to stand. He knew the odds. The British were strong, the Allies powerful. But he also knew history favors the brave. When his soldiers marched, barefoot and hungry through the jungles of Burma, they carried not weapons alone. They carried the hope of 400 million souls. However, luck was again against him. They thought 2 million Indian soldiers who were fighting for Britain will join them. But British leaders told them they are captured army from Japan who have turned against you. Selling their pride, no one in India at that time knew it was Indian National Army to drive away Britishers, and hence the army was defeated and most of them killed without giving them a chance to speak. 3 out of 5 lieutenants were captured, others killed, and unfortunately our leader died in a plane crash, and fate again played a joke. The war had ended. Japan had fallen. The guns of the East had gone silent. And with that silence came the end of one of history's boldest dreams. The army that had marched under a new flag, an army that had vowed to reach Delhi, was now broken, defeated, and killed. Till then no one in India even knew that 40,000 soldiers died for their freedom. The British government faced a dilemma. They had regained control of India but not its loyalty. However, loss of Indian young soldiers was too strong. Everywhere, whispers spread a spirit against British, the biggest mistake by British to crush that spirit. The British decided to make an example. They would try the officers of this rebel army, not as soldiers but as traitors. And so began the most dramatic court-martial in India's history, the Red Fort Trials. Delhi, 1945. The ancient walls of the Red Fort, once home to Mughal emperors, now echoed with the sounds of typewriters, guards' boots, and whispered prayers. Inside a converted hall stood 3 men, not criminals but heroes in shackles. Captain Shah Nawaz Khan, Captain Prem Kumar Sahgal, and Lieutenant Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon. They represented India's 3 great faiths, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh. But in that courtroom they stood as one. Their charge? Treason against the British crown. Their punishment, if found guilty? Death by hanging. The accused stood tall before the court. They admitted they had fought against the British. But they denied being traitors. Shah Nawaz Khan said, "If fighting for the freedom of one's country is treason, then I am guilty." Prem Sahgal declared, "I fought for my country, not for any foreign flag." And Dhillon said, "We were soldiers of a free India, and we obeyed our lawful government, not yours." As the trial dragged on, India held its breath. The defense was led by one of the country's greatest legal minds, a man who had once been a friend and rival of the mysterious leader behind the INA. He argued not in defense of the accused alone, but of an idea that no Indian could be a traitor to India. Crowds gathered outside the Red Fort day and night. All 3 men were found guilty. The sentence: death. The British had intended to silence a rebellion. Instead, they had awakened a revolution. Indians found out that there was someone fighting for their independence. Indians in British Army found out that the people they killed were their own brothers fighting for their freedom in Bombay. The Royal Indian Navy mutiny broke out. Thousands of Indian sailors raised the tricolor on their ships, shouting slogans of freedom. They refused orders, locked up British officers, and demanded independence. Even in the Air Force and Army barracks, sympathy grew for the men of the INA. The British realized, with shock, that their own forces could no longer be trusted. The Empire had ruled India with Indian hands, and now, those hands had turned against it. India exploded. Protests broke out across the nation. British soldiers faced mobs demanding freedom. Even Indian officers within the army warned their superiors that they could no longer ensure discipline. Realizing the danger, the British government backed down. How he died on the morning of August 17, 1945, a Japanese military plane, a twin-engine Mitsubishi Ki-21, prepared for takeoff from the Taihoku airfield in Formosa, now Taipei, Taiwan. Its engines roared in the humid air, the sun blazing over the horizon. Among its few passengers was a man wearing dark aviator glasses, his uniform pressed, his posture defiant. To the Japanese guards, he was traveling under the name Okawa. But only some people knew the truth. The plan was daring: to fly to Manchuria, seek contact with Soviet Union authorities, and negotiate support for India's freedom struggle after Japan's collapse. He believed the dream could still be saved. But fate had other plans. Barely minutes after takeoff, Witnesses reported a loud explosion. The plane burst into flames, plunging into a nearby rice field. Japanese medics rushed to the site. Bodies were burned beyond recognition. But among them, they found one man, severely injured, his face covered in burns, still breathing. He was taken to a nearby military hospital. Doctors tried to save him, but hours later, the man's heartbeat slowed and stopped. The official report read, "Cause of death, third-degree burns, shock, and cardiac failure." The name on the record, Subhas Chandra Bose. The irony of freedom, they say, history is written by the victors. But in India, it was rewritten by the survivors. After freedom came, the new rulers faced a strange dilemma. How do you honor a man who refused to fit neatly into your version of the story? He had fought the same oppressors, but not with silence nor with petitions. He believed in action, not appeasement, and that made him inconvenient. So quietly, subtly, his name began to fade. First from speeches, then from textbooks, then from the minds of generations who would grow up knowing only part of the truth. He fought for an India that would be free from every chain, political, moral, and mental. Yet in that very India, his story was chained again, this time by silence. The man who raised the slogan Jai Hind, now mentioned only as a footnote. The man whose army's blood stirred the final revolt in 1946, now called a controversial figure. The man whose dream made millions believe India could stand on its own, now treated as a ghost of history. Isn't it strange? A nation born from rebellion forgot its greatest rebel. Yet again fate played a cruel joke.